Hi, so I'm Taylor Rothwell. I lead our Dynamics 365 European practice here at Empiric, and I'm joined today by Lawrence Ruijtenberg. Empiric Insights is our video series where our team sits down with experts across different specialities that we recruit for to hear their guidance and perspectives on current influences shaping the industry. Lawrence, would you like to give yourself an introduction?
Yeah, sure. My name is Laurens Ruijtenberg. I'm a principal consultant in the field of process automation using the Microsoft platforms such as the Power Platform and Dynamics. And next to that, I'm also a part-time lecturer at one of our local universities, and I specialize in everything which is related to software engineering, but also AI. So that
So, as many organisations rush to adopt artificial intelligence, some see this as a way to replace entire teams. How can businesses balance the potential of AI with the accountability and risks, especially when deploying it in high pressure sectors such as healthcare and finance?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting and actually very broad question because there are many factors that come into play in those type of
Of
situations.
course.
Um, I always say, if you're really beginning at, with AI or are really still in an experimental phase, it's important to start small. And by small, we mean with small use cases of which you can easily measure the success, basically, or which you can easily fine tune. Because I wouldn't underestimate the degree of the familiarity that you need to, get with the technology and with the ideas of automating using AI. Um, so that's one element to it, right? So it's kind of also about where are you in your AI journey, and also how familiar are you with the technology or with the outcomes. And there are simply, basically put, there are some sectors which lend themselves more favorably towards using AI, right? So everything, regarding marketing, for example, generating content and text is really a strong suit of generative AI. Um, but in other fields where, for example, financial organizations or accountancy firms and those type of organizations, where traceability becomes very important, right? So and the accuracy of the work, um, AI can still be a potential tool to use, but you really start to think about, okay, but how do we keep it traceable, right? How do we make sure that everything adds up in the end? And uh, that's something we're still figuring out to a degree, right? And
Hmm.
which sectors in general are trying to figure out. I think we're right now in a phase where a lot of potential is uncovered, and where we see, nice points of inspiration with cool ideas that we can explore. But to a degree, also, there is still a lot of checks and balances that we need to do and make sure that it scales well. So those are a couple of things you can take into account, but without
Hmm.
zooming into going down the rabbit hole as we're, yeah, I think those two are good starting points, basically. So on one hand, small use cases to start easily to explore what is the potential, and on the other hand, also, which areas within an organization lend themselves, right, to do this, and where is, always making a good balance between risk and results, basically.
No, 100%. And obviously, with it also being, a high pressure sector, these sectors are also highly regulated. Can you see that being a potential issue when AI comes into more of an evolution?
Yeah, so I think this is actually one of the questions we need to answer to really take that next step as well. I mean, accountancy and the financial sector, of course, is a very typical one, but you can also imagine things like medical equipment, which needs to be certified, right?
Yeah.
Um, those types yeah, the software that is embedded in those devices, or which is involved in those types of financial processes, as I mentioned,
Hmm.
traceability is very important. And companies, for example, if you produce medical equipment, you need to be able to explain every step of the software that it is doing, basically, right? You need to be able to explain how certain functionality works, and how medical decisions are made, and on what types of algorithms is that, do they do that, right? Because in the end, especially with medical devices or medical software, let's make it a bit broader, but even medical software that assists in making diagnoses and those types of things.
Mm.
We're talking about human lives potentially, right? So you really need to be able to trace all the decision making in the process, and in the end, you will need
Yeah.
to be able to explain all the steps that a particular piece of code is making. And I think so. To come back to your question, is I think we need to come to a place where we have a framework, but also technology, because this is usually about a combination of people, process, and technology in the end. So I
Hmm.
think, and that's also one of the things we're exploring right now, is that we come to a framework where you can, trace back all the decisions being made in the software being generated, but also in the software development process itself, right? How do you
Mm.
ensure that, a particular piece of software or technology in general meets certain requirements, either from an, legal perspective or from a quality perspective. And in the past, if you look at traditional software engineering, you can look at test-driven development, where you clearly specify out all the test cases up front and say, well, if it passes these tests, we know that it meets a certain level of, well, at least it meets the minimum amount of criteria that we set out for a particular piece of functionality.
Mm.
But in AI, we're now also seeing other types of frameworks which might help in that process, such as spec-driven development, where you start out with a specification, and that specification is actually the input for AI to actually build the software on. Um, but I think that we're still a bit at an infancy stage at that point, right? We're still
Yeah.
exploring the waters in a sense, and but that is something we need to get our head around. Do we really also want to utilize AI in more of these, these more complex fields, basically?
Yeah. Definitely, definitely, and obviously the capabilities of AI generally are, evolving so quickly.
Absolutely.
How are you, yes, so how are you helping clients, overcome maybe or avoid AI fatigue or overwhelming of AI?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Because and I see this happen way too much in the world of technology as a whole. We are trying to sell AI as, as a product on and of itself, right? So
Hmm.
here we're trying to say here, here you have a box of AI, go have fun with it. But in the end, just like with traditional tools and technologies, it's a tool to get to a result, right?
Mm.
So um, I always try to say, well, look at the problem first that you're trying to solve, right? So for a business, that may be a challenge to overcome, an inefficiency you're trying to solve, or business are under economical pressure as well, and also
Mm.
politics. The political world has its own type of effects on organizations. So look at those elements, those puzzle pieces that you're trying to solve, and then try to look at the technology, from an AI perspective, on how can that piece of AI help you out, basically, right?
Mm.
Um, and so the reason why I'm saying that is because you're completely correct, right? AI evolves at such a pace. Everything that I say today that is impossible might be possible by tomorrow or by next week, potentially.
Yeah.
Um, so that's also the discussion I'm trying to evolve. Like, what can we do with AI right now? That's the most dangerous question you can ask a consultant at this day and age, basically, because everything that I might answer today might be invalid by tomorrow. So, what I rather
Mm.
want to talk about is what is the challenge you're trying to solve, and which components of AI can we put into place to help you solve that challenge? Because we might not be able, for example, if you're talking about process automation, we might not be able to automate 100% of the process using AI today, but we can tack on an additional 20% by tomorrow, right? Or we can
Hmm.
take a look at what we already automated using AI, and we can look at on how we can improve that, basically, right? To improve the performance as technology also evolves. Um, but that's really how I look at it, because if you start at a problem, that discussion becomes much easier. The discussion starts to become about solving the problem at hand, and then you're utilizing AI to solve that challenge. But
Hmm.
yeah, you avoid falling into the trap of making promises today which are invalid by tomorrow, basically.
So obviously, Lawrence, you mentioned earlier that you're a lecturer at a university locally. So how have your experiences, both in academia but also as an industry professional, influenced your ideas around artificial intelligence?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I think basically the two fields influence each other. If I look at my day-to-day work, basically, um,
Yeah.
it's of course within academia, are looking at all the possibilities, right, of a potential
Yeah.
technology, and you're exploring new fields. So the ambitions and the goals are quite high, basically. Um,
Hmm.
but in well, let's call it the professional world, where I consult my clients, you're also dealing with the
Yes.
realities of AI, basically, right? And you run into
Hmm.
perhaps certain limitations, or as we mentioned before, like the legal aspects of it, or some other types of complexities that, yeah, AI
Yes.
is still, a bit tricky to implement, right? So in
Hmm.
my perspective, that really helps me, because it kind of works both ways, right? I can take my practical experience that I get from working for my clients, and I can take that more, you know into my work as a lecturer, for example. And on one hand,
Yes.
also a inform my colleagues, but also my students, right? So to put it in the right perspective, for example. In the other hand, being closely involved in academia also allows me to stay on top of the latest developments, basically. And maybe it's
Hmm.
not production ready yet for organizations to implement, but it helps me to give them that peek into the future, like this is coming, right? If you now take care of A, B, and C, then you'll be ready by the time it becomes, a commercial offering. If the technology is mature enough. So there are certainly benefits to it in being in both fields at the same time.
Definitely. And what would you say that business leaders, either from a consulting perspective or even that are working directly for a customer, can actually take from the findings of university around AI?
Yeah, well, AI is moving rapidly, right? And there are also still a lot of limitations, basically, which are inherent to the nature of large language models. I mean, we also,
Hmm.
when we talk about AI, AI is a very big field, and large language models are basically only a part of it, but it's right now the dominant field, which is, really gaining, well, traction is an understatement. It's really popular. Um, but for example, if you look at the research at, for example, text diffusion in
Hmm.
regards to AI, that's really interesting. So, for example, a particular limitation of generative AI, and really, I'm severely oversimplifying this. So, don't pin me down if I get it wrong from a very purely academical perspective, but just to get you, you know, to give an
Yeah.
example of where I'm coming from, is that if you look at a large language model and how it generates text, you always
Hmm.
notice that it just starts with a sentence, and then based on, yeah, probability, basically, it decides on the word that follows based on your prompt.
Hmm.
So your prompt goes through a couple of neural networks. Again, this is grossly oversimplified, But in
Yeah.
the end, a text is being generated, and that text is basically a statistical calculation of what the probability is that a next word follows the word that comes before it. So you build the sentence as you goes along, as the language model goes along. So text diffusion is something which some companies like Google already experimenting with, but which is also now actively being researched, is where you start to generate content as a whole. So you basically you generate an entire block of text and you then start iterating on that. Well, why is that interesting? Well, it can be a potential solution to deal with things like hallucination, basically. Because
Mm.
hallucination, if you look at that, the current way of how LLMs work, if it, based on those probability scores, if it uses the wrong word, you're locked in, right? You're stuck
Mhm.
with that decision because whatever comes before it in terms of the text that has been generated, that's a fixed point. So if you look at hallucination and what it is, so hallucination is the fact that just that you get a wrong answer or that you get a text which doesn't make sense in the end. That's basically
Mm.
a probability score which has gone wrong. But as soon as the LLM has taken a certain direction, it's stuck with that direction on how to formulate the rest of the sentence or this piece of text or whatever the content is you're generating. If you look at it more from that text diffusion perspective, you perceive the text as a whole. So
Mm.
you can already imagine that if you look at the text as a whole and you're constantly iterating on that entire piece of text, that you're not stuck with the decision that you made before, right? Well, of course, the text becomes more specific, but you don't have the problem anymore that if I started my sentence with a certain word, I'm stuck with that. That word can change. The
Mm.
context of the text can change, right? And so I hope that will also lead to less hallucinations, high quality outputs, and that of course, if you look at it from the corporate enterprise world or companies who are looking at these technologies, that also makes it more, well, quote unquote, stable or more reliable to actually use
Yeah.
in a business process, right? Because everything that is less prone to things like hallucination is certainly something that we need right now. Because if you look at the media, there are still news articles popping up from projects that have gone wrong because of an overdependence on AI, and you usually see that those fundamental problems are still at the core of those issues in a sense. And then, you need to put all that effort that you saved, or much of the effort that you saved in, checking the output of AI or course correcting on the output of AI. And so that basically.
Perfect. No, sounds good. And I guess maybe honing in a little bit more now on sort of the Microsoft products and the wider ecosystem. Obviously, over the past couple of years, Dynamics 365 customer engagement, CRM, has become a lot more intertwined with Power Platform and the products surrounding that. Firstly, what would you say is actually driving this? And secondly, why is it now becoming essential for companies to build, talent pools that, go across both skill sets rather than just the one?
Yeah, so it's actually also quite an interesting development that you see basically also in the Microsoft ecosystem, right? And with software products in general, but especially within Microsoft. I mean, you saw these various AI initiatives starting out in various of the core technologies from a Microsoft 365 perspective, or in
Mm.
Azure, Power Platform, you slowly saw in the beginning, you slowly saw things like Copilot assistants being built in. But
Mm.
over time, you also see that those areas start to overlap. So if you only already just look at Power Platform and Copilot Studio, you already see a big overlap in terms of functionality. So if you look at
Mm.
functionality like AI Builder, where you can also execute prompts and where you can also do deterministic AI, that's all very valuable. But you also see, of course, Copilot Studio, which is now these days also completely, generative AI driven if you want to.
Yeah.
So you see an overlap happening. And That also is happening in Dynamics, of course, but also across the entire Microsoft technology stack, right? Everything is coming together in either Microsoft Copilot for M365 or Copilot Studio. And so I think we'll see more and more a type of convergence of these technologies
Mm.
where they don't only not just only overlap in terms of what they can do,
Hmm.
but where it will also become a more integrated experience, basically. And you already see it in Copilot for M365. That's also the entry points for where your agents live that you built with Copilot Studio, for example. And if you create an agent in Copilot Studio,
Mm.
it integrates back into the Power Platform because you can still make workflows. You attach it to workflows which implement very specific business processes, or you can
Hmm.
integrate it with other parts of your IT landscape, or maybe you have a custom model running on Azure AI Foundry, basically, and that's also something these days you can consume with Copilot Studio and various parts of Power Platform, right? So
Mm.
you see all these worlds coming together. So my expectation is that this will become more and more of an integrated experience where
Hmm.
every technology behind it is basically a puzzle piece that you can use or utilize depending on your needs and requirements. And where, from an end user perspective, I think we will move more and more into a world where you have a central starting point where you start your work as a professional in your daily life, right? And
Hmm.
where you will start using it more as a hub to do your work, to manage your agents, set out
Hmm.
tasks, collect results, and of course in turn also use AI to work with those results. And maybe that seems a bit of for some people that might seem as a bit of a far-fetched future. But if you look
Hmm.
at what Microsoft is now doing and also their ideas around a frontier firm, it is a direction that they at least follow, right? And
Mm.
everything in their product development and how they offer services is centered around that same idea. And of course, that also has other elements to it because it will also require different capabilities from the people who use them and how they do their work, right?
Mm.
You also
Of
become a
course.
bit of a manager, in effect, of your agents. So,
Yes.
yeah.
No, of course. Perfect. No, sounds good. And you mentioned as well a bit at the start of the answer around sort of the wider AI within Microsoft. Are there any other particular trends around Microsoft and AI and what they're sort of putting forward that you're particularly excited about at the moment?
I think at its core, it does come down to that broader integration, basically. You know, I can, I can, you know, mm, let me rephrase that question. Quick rewind. Um, I think if you look at the developments at Microsoft side, we have a new announcement every month or so, basically, around a
Mm.
new next step in development that they've taken, a new feature that gets released. I'm mostly excited about the pace of innovation, basically, that's happening currently within the field of AI and Microsoft specifically, and how they embed it in their products. I also enjoy the fact that it's becoming more of a commodity, right? I think every
Mm.
step in a direction where you need less advanced knowledge about AI is a step in the good direction because it empowers also end users and people who we traditionally think of as being on the business side of things in a company to also utilize that technology and that power to make their own lives easier so they can enjoy their work more. I think that's really exciting, the improvements in our daily life in terms of productivity, in the way how we experience work. It also requires some rethinking on how you do your work and how you're going to manage that work. But I think from a Microsoft perspective, they're setting all the paces in that direction basically. And of course, and that's also an argument or a question that I also hear. What about all the AI experts in the field, who do know how large language models work, who are training their own custom models? All those people are still needed in the end because you always have particular use cases where you, for example, really need a custom trained model on a specific particular topic or area of expertise. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and but it really, those people who are more experts in the field of AI will always be needed for those edge cases, those new
Yeah.
innovative cases, basically, right? That really push again the limits of what is possible. But I love the idea that Microsoft is pushing it more towards an area where it's becoming a commodity, so it becomes easier for all kinds of information workers and people at companies to utilize the power of AI in the end.
Was there anything else you'd like to add? If so, I can ask the question, but if not, I guess
More of a central comment, basically, and you don't actually have to ask that. I think one of the biggest mistakes we can make right now, if we talk about AI and how it can be utilized, would be to say, well, certain things are not possible, or thinking in terms of limitations of AI, because AI is now rapidly evolving, and
yeah,
at the same time, we're now primarily looking at large language models, right? That's now the big thing where we get a lot of
yeah,
traction and we see a lot of value. But don't underestimate the fact that AI is a larger field. It maybe LLMs have inherent limitations that we don't get around, but maybe the next paradigm of AI is sitting around the corner, right? So, and
mm,
I think, I think there we passed a turning point where now all focus is on AI, and where we might not even need to think about how do LLMs evolve in the next couple of years, but what is the next thing beyond LLMs, right? So
mm-hmm.
also, if I would advise my clients, I would also say that, right? Not Don't just focus on LLMs, right? Try to focus on the field of AI as a whole, and
Mm-hmm.
see, also what is around the corner when you get to the next stage of AI, right? The field is rapidly advancing, and I really think there are a lot of great things coming towards us, but also a lot of puzzle
Mm,
pieces we need to solve along as we go along.
100%. 100%.
Yeah,
Perfect. No, Lawrence, thank you very much for your time.
yeah, sure, not a problem.